This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
Hi, I'm Li Xueying, and you're listening to Asian Insider. In this episode, ST's India Correspondent Debarshi Dasgupta talks about a city in South India called Trichy and its long-standing ties with Singapore. Hello, Debarshi. It's good to have you on the show.
Hi, Xueying. Thank you for having me again. It's always nice to be.
Yes, it's nice to hear from you. So, Debarshi, one detail from your story that jumped out at me was this, which is that Trichy has no direct flights to the capital city in India of New Delhi, but it has 5 daily flights to Singapore. So that's pretty unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. There are certain parts of India that have historically been closer to other foreign locations than parts in India, right? So Trichy is one of them. It's not unlike Kerala, which is on the other side of the southern tip, on the left-hand side, and which faces the Arabian Sea. So for the longest time, Calicut, which is in North Kerala, had no direct flights to Delhi, but it had several direct flights to cities in West Asia or the Gulf, right? So even today, Calicut has just one direct flight to Delhi, but it has, I checked this morning, 7 daily direct flights to Dubai. So that's because Kerala has had long maritime connections with countries in the Gulf. So it's one of those historical quirks, right? And similarly also for Tamil Nadu, which has had long historical connections, maritime connections with Southeast Asia. So I think it's a reflection of that history.
And Trichy is also a bit of a hub within Tamil Nadu. So can you tell us a bit more about how that became this hub for the flow of people going in and out of the state of Tamil Nadu?
Right. So one thing that's important to note is that Trichy is quite centrally located within Tamil Nadu,
Yes.
right? It's one of those second-tier cities in Tamil Nadu after Chennai. And it's accessible by good roads virtually with all other major cities in Tamil Nadu. So under, I think, 5 hours, you can drive from Trichy to practically all the cities in Tamil Nadu, which means that a lot of people from other cities, if they have to fly abroad, choose to come to Trichy than, some of the airports that may be closer to their home. So this means that cities such as Madurai and Coimbatore, which are smaller cities in Tamil Nadu, have not seen international flights take off in the same number as they have from Trichy. So that's one reason. And besides, obviously, Trichy has had a long history of being an educational and a technical hub. A lot of industries that came up in Trichy. So there's that background. And then one of India's oldest airports also came up in Trichy as far as back in 1936. And then commercial flights began as early as 1948 with Colombo, and then with Sharjah in 1996 and Kuwait in 1998, and then finally Singapore in 2007. So there is that background.
So Tamil Nadu as a whole, of course, has this long-standing and rich connection with Singapore. And I think that if we look at Singapore's population today, about 5% are of Tamil origin. Their families came from Tamil Nadu, of course, as well as Sri Lanka, starting from the early 19th century. So what about those who continue to come into Singapore today from Tamil Nadu? Can you tell us a bit more about who they are and what's driving them to continue to seek out opportunities here in Singapore?
So I think those who are looking to migrate abroad are children of parents or those who've had grandparents who have migrated to other parts of the world, including Singapore, and have seen the prosperity that this has brought into their lives. So migrants with modest mud homes have gone to Singapore, then use the money that they earn there to come back and build 2-story bungalows, buy bikes, cars, get their children married off lavishly. So all this creates a very aspirational desire to do the same. And lured by these successful stories of migrants, there are many today who choose to go abroad with dreams of better life. And for many, it's the first choice, right? It's not that they want to stay in Tamil Nadu or go to Delhi to work. They want to go to Singapore. They want to go to Dubai. They want to go to Malaysia because there is this network, a deep historical network of migration that continues even today. And in fact, I wanted to mention something about how this connection, right? I mean, I mentioned in my story that there is this connection with the 10th and 11th century where you had the Chola Empire that was a historical seafaring kingdom known for its maritime prowess. And it's a connection that is also visible linguistically. And this will illustrate how this part of India, Tamil Nadu, has had this long story of migration through the sea. So the English word catamaran comes from the Tamil word kattamaram, which basically means woods that are tied together. So you have this story of how people have moved out in boats. And even today, in some parts of Manarguri, which is one of the regions that has a strong connection with Singapore and Southeast Asia, certain Malay words are used instead of the Tamil equivalent. For example, roda, which means wheel in Malay, is used as a replacement for chakaram, which is the Tamil word for wheel. So there is this deep historical connection that children who are growing up can't escape. And it has brought about very, very visible, happy changes on the ground there. So for many, it's the first choice.
I see. And what has changed in terms of the opportunities that they can find in Singapore? So you talked about how for some, the grandparents had come to Singapore to seek their fortunes. What kind of jobs were they doing back then? And what kind of jobs are their descendants looking for nowadays? Has that changed?
Certainly, this changed. In fact, I was speaking with somebody yesterday. Coincidentally, this person who I interviewed for my story sent me photographs from his relative's house. This is a 75-year-old individual whose father worked in Singapore. So this was obviously in the early 20th century, right? He worked as a ticket inspector on the Singapore bus systems, right?
Right.
And the photographs that he sent me were of Lee Kuan Yew's laminated photograph, a big portrait of him on the wall that he's hung on the wall, and also a picture of his book, The Singapore Story, that he's hung up. So that shows the deep gratitude. But so people went as traders, as low-skilled workers. But I think now there is a slow shift toward IT, other skilled professions such as chefs. So you're seeing that shift now.
In the earlier days, the people who came from Tamil Nadu to Singapore, they fell into two different kind of categories. There were those who did return to Tamil Nadu after some time, after they've earned enough money to upgrade their homes and to also raise their families back in their homeland. And then there are those who stayed on in Singapore and settled down and became Singaporeans. Do you see the descendants from both sides returning to Singapore today? I think I read in your story that there was, one person whose grandfather went back to Tamil Nadu, but his siblings did not go back. His siblings stayed on in Singapore. So is that a kind of dynamic that you see in Tamil Nadu or in Trichy, where you have, different strands of the family, some staying on in Singapore and some who return to Tamil Nadu, and how do they intersect with one another?
Yes, I think, as you mentioned, there are many people who chose to stay back, but they didn't choose to sever their connections completely with Tamil Nadu.
Yes.
They continue to fly very often. They continue to marry into families, so that this is a marriage and family connections continue to drive the traffic between Singapore and Tamil Nadu. Even today, there are these migrants who are permanent residents of Singapore or Singapore citizens who keep coming back to see their elderly parents for holidays. So definitely there is this connection that thrives. Even though they may have chosen to stay back, there are these migrants who keep returning, whether it's to continue to, let's say, take up additional responsibilities by choosing to farm land, right? A lot of people have land here.
Right.
And with better facilities to irrigate, that's one option. So instead of selling all the land, which many people did earlier, if you continue to hold land, many are choosing to come back to farm on that land. So there is definitely this traffic, even if you've settled in Singapore.
And you were also writing about how there were some who returned to Trichy after having settled down overseas. Can you tell me a bit more about what are the forces that are pulling them back to Tamil Nadu?
Yeah.
And what is the net balance of the inflow and outflow of people from Tamil Nadu nowadays?
Yeah. So I think Tamil Nadu is certainly one of the more developed parts of India. Because of that, there are better economic opportunities for people to come back and build their lives. So many are choosing, as I said, this Kaveri Delta region. Kaveri is a river that flows in this region. But despite that, historically, this region was drought prone, because of which many couldn't farm, profitably. And that was one of the main reasons why many people chose to migrate abroad. But with better irrigation facilities, as I mentioned, many are choosing to come back now. So that's one option. And agriculture is becoming an option, a viable career option for some to come back with better agriculture technologies and practices, and a desire to be connected to the ground, right? I mean, after COVID, you had this return to the roots movement, right? So many people chose to go back to their villages. And what do you do in a village, right? I mean, you can work from home, but because you're there sitting with this patch of land, you start farming. So that's one option. And as I said, work from home has allowed many people to move back to Trichy because you have, and the journey ranges of better internet connectivity. So you can work from home. So a lot of people who worked abroad and in India, mostly in India, have chosen to come back, because of which there is a lot of growth in these rented workspaces in the city, which is something I mentioned in the story. So there's that aspect as well. But I don't think that this has tilted really the scale in favor of migration back into Tamil Nadu. I think the trend definitely from the coastal region is one of migrating outwards.
Right. Okay.
Right? So there's one thing that needs to be mentioned here. Migration phenomenon is how over the last, let's say, decade or so, a lot of people from other parts of India, which is northern India, eastern India, have migrated into Tamil Nadu for work, as Tamilians themselves migrate outside for work, and a society that ages. So you don't have the adequate workforce, so you have migration from other parts of India into Tamil Nadu.
Right, that's fascinating. Tell me how that has changed the tenor of the society within Tamil Nadu. So you're talking about how maybe the locals have moved out, or some of them have moved out for other opportunities, but yet you have the inflow of people from the other parts of India. What does Tamil Nadu today look like as opposed to how it was maybe, say, 50 years ago?
A few years ago. So I think there is definitely larger presence of people who are referred to as Hindi current, right? Hindi speakers. And that's a wide term that includes people who are from other, not even Hindi speakers, right? They may be Bengali, but still may be referred as Hindi current, Hindi speakers. So there is definitely more visibility go in Chennai. And I'm an East Indian, right? I mean, I was born in Assam and I'm a Bengali. I have little understanding of Tamil Nadu. I don't want to hazard it, and say something that may be incorrect, but what I can safely say is that there is much, much greater visibility of migrants, younger migrants, right? I'm not saying older migrants who have moved into Tamil Nadu, but younger migrants who've come from North India who are doing low-skill work like construction, or those who are working in factories. My parents, when they worked in Assam, they had help who helped raise me, right, as a child. Her daughter, who from Assam, she went to Tirupur, which is a textile manufacturing hub in Tamil Nadu. She went there because she learned tailoring skills in Assam. And where do you go? Tamil Nadu, which is the center of textile hubs. So it has changed a lot, right? Visibly, you have migrants from other parts of India. And with the younger workforce from Tamil Nadu moving out, you have the younger workforce replacing it from other parts of India.
I see. And you also mentioned the work from home phenomenon. So you have some people who return to Tamil Nadu where they can work remotely. Where do they tend to come from, and what kind of work do they do?
Where do they tend to come from? A lot of people would have come from, let's say, Bangalore, right, which is not very far from Tamil Nadu, which is an IT hub. Many people who want to be closer to their parents, perhaps even Chennai, who want to be closer to their parents in Trichy have come. So mainly from Bangalore and Chennai, but other cities as well, I assume, from Bombay, from Delhi. And a lot of these people would have been in the IT services industry primarily.
But not from outside of India?
A few. So there are people who have migrated IT, right, from the US. There have been workers who have moved back from the US and from the UK. I know of certain instances.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And just coming back to Singapore and the people who come back to Trichy from Singapore, I think you have this interviewee who said, I have a comfortable life today because of what I did in Singapore. Then how can I forget Singapore? So there was a very impassioned quote from him about how his time in Singapore had changed his life for the better. Mr. Venkatesh Raj, who actually sold biryani and nasi goreng in Singapore before he went back to sell paratha. So can you tell me a bit more about how Singapore stacks up against other destinations for those who are from Tamil Nadu? How do they view Singapore as a place to go to earn money, to bring back their salary, and to basically set their families up for life?
So there is a deep sense of gratitude and affection for Singapore, given how it changed the fortunes for many in this coastal region. And this is especially true of, let's say, those who chose to migrate in the early 20th century to Singapore. So this means grandparents and parents of those who are young today, right? So that is definitely being passed on to the next generation. So those who have experienced this gratitude, this social progression that they saw in their family and even amongst their neighbors. So for them, Singapore continues to be the first choice. As I mentioned, the story of the 21-year-old son of a migrant, former migrant to Singapore, right, who's returned to look after his agricultural land, but his son wants to migrate now next, and Singapore is his first choice.
Right.
But that said, Singapore has a limited intake, right? So there are many who are choosing to look at other locations also, including countries in West Asia and Malaysia, which have historically, we must acknowledge, have been centers of immigration for people from Tamil Nadu. It's not just Singapore, right? Even Malaysia in Southeast Asia and other countries in the Gulf, where people from Tamil Nadu have always gone. But now, increasingly, you also have other countries, especially in North America, the US, Canada, are big options.
Yes.
Where people are looking to, the United Kingdom, and even South Korea now. So that's one option.
So when you're saying that the other destinations are coming up as possibilities, whether it's UK or South Korea, for instance, are they paying more than what Singapore companies are paying?
So it depends what you're going for. If you're going for as a skilled legal migrant worker, as an IT worker, I think companies in the US would pay more, if not comparable to what Singapore does. But it all depends what sectors, right? You're going, there would be job options that would pay more. But I think it's also the possibility of being networked and more options, right? It's a question of the US economy. There are more options to break into, I guess, other jobs, more entrepreneurial possibilities in a country like the United States than in Singapore.
Yeah.
It's not as if you can't be a chef in India. It's not as if you can't be an IT technician. It's more the fact that they can earn several times more. Even a construction worker, like I met a construction worker on a bus late night back into the city, and he was telling me that he possibly earns more or less the same in terms of just money, the money that he gets, right? He's a migrant worker in Singapore and a construction sector worker, but he would earn pretty much more or less the same as he did in Tamil Nadu. But in Singapore, he was not paying anything to stay, and his food was more or less covered. So he was saving a lot more. You save a lot more when you're a single migrant worker in a country like Singapore than what you do working in Tamil Nadu, where you have to pay for other things. So there is that option of not only earning more, but also saving more.
Okay, so just talking about this reminds me of the other feature that you did along with your colleagues in the Bureau about how young Indians are finding ever new frontiers in the search for jobs, both within India and outside to countries such as Israel, Germany. So could you tell me a bit more about that as well?
So obviously a lot of people are migrating outside of India to look for jobs. Better futures, right? So there are an estimated, and I looked up these numbers today, so estimated 35.4 million members of the Indian diaspora. This includes non-resident Indians, that is Indian citizens who are resident abroad, as well as foreign nationals, those of Indian origin, that people we refer to as people of Indian origin. So 35.4 million, that's a big number, and it continues to grow. And it grows because the number of Indian students who are choosing to migrate each year continues to rise. In 2020, that number is about 260,000. And in 2024, that went up to 1 million, so which is almost 4 times, right? And many of these students who go abroad continue to stay on in their countries of study because there are better opportunities to work, possibility to earn more, do things that you cannot do, whether it's high-end science research or IT-related work, things that you may not have the opportunity to do in India. So this continues to add to that number of growing Indian diaspora and the narrative of Indians becoming successful migrants abroad. And on the other hand, we've also seen many who are desperate to do so, right? Even if it's illegally, as in the case of Tamil Nadu, right? Because there are many illegal migrants. In fact, someone claimed that there is this trend of Indian Tamils who go abroad, for example, to the United Kingdom, and they throw the Indian passport and they say they're Sri Lankan Tamils and claim refugee status, right? So there is that desperate attempt to even go and find better paying job opportunities abroad, including in conflict zones such as in Russia, as you've seen, from Kerala, people being stuck there and being killed, unfortunately, or being caught up in scam operations in Cambodia. Tamil Nadu has seen many of these people being entrapped by scamsters in Cambodia. So I think despite the kind of economic progression we've seen in India, and especially in Tamil Nadu, which I mentioned is one of the more developed states, I think for a large country of 1.4 billion people and growing, the number of meaningful, well-paying jobs that bring satisfaction are just not enough. So which is why we're seeing this continuing trend of emigration from India.
And how troubling is this for the Modi government?
Well, 2 aspects. Legal migration definitely is a success story, right? The Modi government, even though some will say that it's a symptom of the brain drain because it is losing its talented skill pool to other countries who are adding value in the US or in Singapore. But I think the Indian government has now even chosen to sort of portray the Indian diaspora as something that adds value to the Indian economy. And certainly it is true, right? Because India is, I think, the largest recipient of remittances. So they add value to the Indian economy. So in that sense, legal migration is certainly an asset. And I think it's something that needs to be pushed. And the government is pushing for it, right? When it's negotiating free trade agreements, mobility of workforce is something that this government brings up and which continues to be a stumbling block in some free trade agreements. But I think illegal migration is definitely a concern. Certainly, it's not a good thing if Indians are being killed in the battlefront between India and Ukraine. It doesn't cast this government in good light to have its citizens being caught up in a conflict zone when all they wanted is a better life for themselves.
Well, thanks so much for sharing all of that, Debarshi. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. Always good to be with you on the show.
Well, that's a wrap for Asian Insider. If you would like to read our column, we have a link in our podcast show notes. This episode was produced and edited by Faisal Sani. Thank you for listening.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.